Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alim hakim. Wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-'aliyyil azim. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah ta'ala, we're going to continue trying to cover the chapters on the book Al-Maqasid by Imam Nawawi and translated by Sheikh Nuh Hameen Keller. And so inshallah ta'ala, we're going to be looking at the chapter on Tayammum, which is on page 25 in the book. And we're talking about section 2.21, 2.21. So inshallah ta'ala, we're going to go over this section. This section, I'm going to focus a little bit more on one particular aspect of it because that's the one that's we're more likely to experience. And then I'll also mention some things specifically regarding it to try to make things a little bit easier. So our author, rahimahullah ta'ala, hafidhullah, he mentions, when unable to use water, dry ablution is a dispensation to perform the prayer or similar act of worship requiring ablution without lifting one's minor or major impurity. By the use of earth for one's ablution, the conditions for the legal validity of performing dry ablution are. And so this is talking about the aspect of when a person is not able to use water for whichever reason that it may be, whether it be for a lack of water or for the use of a particular bandage or the like. So he mentions that one lack water or fear to use it, i.e., as it mentions, fear including both from thirst, one's own thirst, or that of companions and animals with one, even if in the future, and from illness, an ailment from which one fears that performing a normal ablution or purificatory bath would cause harm to life or limb, disability, becoming seriously ill, an increase in one's ailment, a delay in recovering from one's illness, considerable pain, or a bad effect from the water, such as a radical change in one's skin color on a visible part of the body. One's own previous experience may be sufficient to establish the probability that one of these will occur if a full ablution or bath is performed. Or one may depend on a physician whose information concerning it is acceptable, meaning one with skill in medicine, whose word one believes, even if he is not a Muslim. So he's mentioning here the conditions in terms of when it would be permissible to use tayammum instead of making an actual ablution, instead of making actual wudu. And so again, the aspect of a lack of water, or for the case of a bandage or the like, meaning in terms of the like, he mentioned the different situations. Or we're talking about there's going to be an issue involving life or limb, or it's going to be an issue involving recovery. It has to be something that's by using water is going to cause harm to an individual, either by worsening an ailment or prolonging the healing from an ailment. Essentially, if you want to give a summation, this is more or less what we're talking about. And again, it has to be something that's considered to be more or less significant, meaning that if a person has a minor scar or a minor cut, and by using water, it will just, cause a minor irritation or the like, this is not necessarily what we're talking about. We're talking about, for example, if a person would possibly gain an infection, or if it was going to leave a permanent mark, or a undesirable type of mark on an area that is visible. So these are things to take in consideration if a person is going to come across this, because more than likely it's going to be a bandage or a medical type of situation that many of us, if we need to make tayammum, are going to be making tayammum for. Now, next, that dry ablution take place after the beginning of the prayer's time, if it is for an obligatory prayer or a non-obligatory one that has a particular time. So this is from the standpoint of the obligatory prayers in relation to tayammum, is that if a person is going to be making tayammum, then this is going to be a requirement for every prayer when the prayer time comes in, meaning that it's not like wudu, where if one makes wudu, as long as one does not break the wudu, they can continue on praying with that same wudu. In the case of tayammum, the prayer time, it signifies the time for renewal of the tayammum, meaning that for every obligatory prayer, you're going to have to renew the Tayammum. So if you made Tayammum for Dhuhr, when Asr time comes in, you're going to have to renew your Tayammum for Salatul Asr. The same with Maghrib, Isha, Fajr. As long as you're making Tayammum, you're going to have to perform a Tayammum for every prayer, because again, Tayammum is a dispensation. It is not the same as actual purification. That if lacking water, one search for some before performing dry ablution. When one is sure there is none, one performs dry ablution without searching for it. And so the aspect of searching, it is situational in terms of where you are. Essentially, ideally, you would go in the 6 directions, meaning forward, behind, right, left, up, and down, if that is applicable. But again, as it mentions in the comment and in the notes, that if one is certain, you have to have a level of certainty, a level of surety that there is no water, then there is no requirements that one search. But in the case where there may be water, then requirements is that if it's from a lack of water that you're making Tayammum, that you go in search of water. As I mentioned, these are more or less hypotheticals for many of us. Many of us will never experience this, but in the case that a person is in this type of situation, these are things that are good to know. And that's one use earth. Plain, purifying earth that contains dust, even the dust contained in sand, though not pure sand devoid of dust. And so this is one of the things that makes the Shafi'i school a little bit more difficult than some of the other schools, is that in making Tayammum, you have to use pure earth that has dust. Yes, sand can be used, but as I mentioned, it has to be sand that has dust. It cannot just be the pure sand that, as it mentions, is devoid of dust. So this makes it a little bit more difficult in terms of the capability of being able to make Tayammum, in particular for most of us, where our Tayammum is going to be based upon a medical condition. So if you're following the strict rule of the Shafi'i school, this is something that you're going to have to take in consideration. And the things like, potting soil and the like are not going to be sufficient because of the added things that they, often put in those type of things. So one of the easier ways, I guess you could say, is if you're able to go to an area where you're able to obtain the earth lawfully, then, and it's not going to be that top soil that you see. Is going to be more or less, again, it has to be the soil that contains dust. The best example that I can give is that if anyone has ever gone to a burial, when they dig up the grave, that you see that earth that has, a good amount of dust and such. That is the, type of earth that we're talking about. So if you're able to go to an area where you're able to get that type of earth, then that's the type of earth that you'll use, and you can, dig it up. However, the thing is that for every Tayammum, you're going to have to make sure that you're using fresh earth. So again, in the Shafi'i school, the aspect of Tayammum becomes a little bit more difficult. So in these particular cases, sometimes I would recommend, in particular, again, if you're coming from a medical situation, which many of us will be coming from for making Tayammum, is that, you may consider the Hanafi and the Maliki school of law in this regard. And, for example, in Sheikh Nur's other translation, The Reliance of the Traveler, he actually mentions the actual Hanafi position in that regard because of, the difficulty of the Shafi'i opinion. Now, the integrals of dry ablution are, and so these are the minimum requirements for when one wants to make a dry ablution. That one make the intention when one first strikes the earth, and it must continue until one wipes part of the face for authorization. To perform the obligation of the prayer or that which requires dry ablution, the former intention suffices for everything, though the latter only for itself. And so, he's giving you the criterion in terms of what is a sufficient intention so that it will cover whatever it is that you're making Tayammum for. So if you make the intention that whatever I'm making Tayammum with the intention to allow myself to perform that which requires dry ablution, then this will suffice for everything that you're going to make it for. It's just that you have to understand, like we mentioned before, for the obligatory prayers in particular, you're going to have to do this for every prayer. It's not going to be sufficient just to carry it from prayer to prayer for every prayer time that comes in, you're going to have to make sure that you make this intention and do the Tayammum again. So this suffices for, the one obligatory prayer that you're praying in its time, and then everything that's considered to be lesser than that. Because the obligatory prayer is considered to be the highest level, so to speak, in terms of those things that require wudu. And then anything lesser than that, it is fine to use that same tayammum to do that. So even if you make the intention for performing the obligatory prayer, that you make the intention to make tayammum for performing the obligatory prayer, all lesser prayers, for example, sunnah prayers, and then also things like touching the Quran or carrying the Quran will become permissible based upon that higher intention that you made. But, for example, if you make the intention that I'm performing tayammum in order to touch the Quran, then in that regard, you would not be able, for example, to pray sunnah prayers, and definitely not an obligatory prayer. Because, again, that's considered to be something lesser in terms of the categorization. So just you have to be mindful of what intention that you make when you're performing tayammum. The next one, that the dry ablution be performed by striking the earth twice, once for wiping the face and a second time for wiping the arms. So there are two required limbs that have to be wiped when you're making tayammum, one being the face, the other being the arms. And the predominant position in the Shafi'i school is that the arms are up to and including the elbow. And so when you're making tayammum, you have to strike the earth twice. Generally speaking, what we're talking about here is that when you're making tayammum, the sunnah way is, if we were to pretend that I had some earth right in front of me here, is that you would strike the earth, and that would be your one time. And the sunnah is that you knock your hands together to knock off any excess dirt, because it's not about getting yourself dirty, it's about the aspect of purification. So you strike the earth. Some actually say that the aspect of striking the earth twice, part of it is that you actually strike the earth twice itself. But at least striking the earth once, knocking off the excess dirt, and then that's when you're going to wipe the face. And the wiping of the face is the same as when we make wudu, meaning that it has to reach all of the areas that are considered to be the face. So you wipe the face in all the areas that are considered to be the face, and then you will strike the earth a second time for when you go to wipe the arms. So wiping of the arms, the way that you do this is that you start with the right arm, going down to the elbow, coming across like this, such that your thumb is coming here, and you go out with this thumb. So again, it's coming down to the elbow, coming around, such that your thumb is going to be on the inner palm, and then it comes off like this. And then you do the same thing on the left side. You take your arm, go down to the elbow, go around again, and come out like this. And again, it has to be two unique strikes, one for the face, one for the arms. That one's hands or anything else such as a handkerchief convey the earth up to the face and arms after having shaken the excess dust from one's hands. That's what I was mentioning before, the aspect of tapping your hands like this in order to shake off anything excess. D and E, to wipe all the face, not missing under the nose and hands and arms, up to and including the elbows. That's what we were mentioning. The entire area that's considered the face. I didn't take my kufi off, but for example, my kufi is coming down to part of my face. I would have to make sure I either lifted it up or that I took it off altogether to make sure, again, that the entire area of my face is wiped. And then, the area of the hand is wiped as well. So for example, if one has a ring on, one would take off the ring to ensure that the entire area of the hands up to and including the elbow are reached. And to do the above in the order mentioned. This has to be done in this particular order. It cannot be done in any other order. So these are the integrals. These are the arkan, those things that if they are not done, your tayammum will not be considered to be valid. Now, the sunnahs of the tayammum, the sunnahs of the dry ablution are to begin with the bismillah, meaning the wording Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. This is something that is considered to be a sunnah when you begin, that you say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, similar to the wudu. To wipe the right arm before the left, as we already mentioned, that you start with the right and then you'll go to the left. And to wipe the arms immediately after striking the earth, after wiping the face, without pause between them, meaning that you're going to have continuity. And similar to the aspect of wudu, so that's one of the sunnahs in the Shafi'i school. It's considered to be an obligation in, for example, the Maliki school, but it's a sunnah in the Shafi'i school that you have continuity in your acts of purification. And for wiping the arms, holding the palms up to the place, holding the palms up to place the left hand crosswise under the right, with the left hand's fingers touching the backs of the fingers of the right hand, sliding the left hand up to the right wrist, then curling the fingers around the side of the wrist. One slides the left hand to the right elbow, then turns the left palm so it rests on the top of the right forearm, with his thumb pointed away from one before sliding it back down to the wrist, where one wipes the back of the right thumb with the inside of the left thumb. One then wipes the left arm in the same manner, followed by interlacing the fingers, rubbing the palms together, and then dusting the hands off lightly. And so I already gave you the example. He's just including the aspect, so coming here, here, coming out around, and then coming here, 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 and then interlacing the fingers and rubbing the palms. So this is what he's including as well. Now, dry ablution is nullified by the occurrence of ritual impurity, whether minor or major, meaning that if you lose your wudu, or you lose, you go into a state of janaba, just like if you were to have actually made ablution or actually made ghusl, it will also invalidate your tayammum. Or the appearance of water when one is not in prayer, meaning this belief that one can now obtain water also nullifies the dry ablution when it occurs during one's prayer, if the prayer is one which must be later made up, like that of someone at home who performs dry ablution for lack of water. Because if one performs dry ablution in a place where water is generally available during the whole year, it is obligatory to make up one's prayer in view of the fact that dry ablution has been performed for a rare excuse. So we're talking about the aspect, if you're making tayammum because of a lack of water, if water appears, then now you have to go and you have to make wudu. The rule is that whoever performs a prayer without full ritual purity because of a rare excuse is obliged to make up his prayer, as when the water of a city or village is cut off for a brief period, or times during which those praying perform dry ablution. While if one has performed it in a place where water is seldom available during the year, it is not obligatory to make up one's prayer, as when one performs dry ablution in the desert. But if not of those prayers that must be made up later, such as that of a desert traveler who has performed dry ablution, then the belief that one can now obtain water when it occurs during prayer does not nullify one's dry ablution, and one finishes the prayer, which is adequate, though is recommended to interrupt it in order to begin again after one has performed ablution. So I think that's more or less self-explanatory, but just as a summation, if you're in the desert and you need to make tayammum and water comes available while you're in the midst of the prayer, you do not have to stop your prayer. You can continue the prayer, even though water has come. However, if you're in an area where water is normally available, and that for the most part is going to be for most of us, if it's a rare situation that's the case, then you would stop the prayer and you would continue, you would go and you would make ablution, and your tayammum would become invalidated. One must perform one dry ablution for each prescribed prayer, though one may perform any number of non-obligatory prayers for funeral or funeral prayers with it. As we mentioned before, the hierarchy in terms of those acts of worship that require a state of purification, and how we are going to look at that in relation to the tayammum. Now, dry ablution for injuries. This is where it becomes a little bit more difficult. If one has a bandage or cast on a part of the body normally washed in ablution, addressing one cannot remove without causing oneself harm, one wipes it with water when one comes to it in the ablution sequence, in addition to performing a complete dry ablution. So this is in the case, so say for example, I had a bandage on my head, which in the case of well, let's say, for example, I had a bandage on my foot, because in Shafi'i school you can just wipe a portion of your head. Let's say I had a bandage on my foot such that I cannot wash my entire foot. When I come to the area of my foot in the wudu, I would just wipe the bandage with wet hands, and then I would make a tayammum in its stead, because I'm not able to make a full ablution due to the bandage. This is what this is referring to. One need not later make up prescribed prayers performed with such an ablution, provided that one had ablution when the bandage or cast was first applied, and that it does not cover more than necessary to hold it in place, and provided also that it is not on the face or arms as discussed next. Again, this is where it becomes more difficult. So technically speaking, in the Shafi'i school, if a person has a bandage on in an area that you would need to make ablution, that you need to make wudu, so essentially the face, the hands up to including the elbow, the head, or the feet. If you had a bandage in one of those areas, then it would, and you cannot remove it, and you can fulfill the requirements for the wudu with that bandage on, then technically speaking, in order for you not to need to make up the prayer, you would need to make sure that that bandage first and foremost went on while you were in a state of wudu. You had to have had a complete wudu before the bandage was applied. Secondly, the bandage has to be small enough such that it only covers the affected area and enough of the healthy skin for it to adhere to it, meaning that it can't cover too much of the healthy skin. So this becomes a problem with things like casts, because casts cover much more than the healthy, much more of the healthy skin than is what is necessarily needed. And so this becomes an issue. And it has to be such a situation where it is not a bandage that is on the face or the arms up to including the elbow. Why? Because these are areas of tayammum. So the basis of it is that if you have a bandage either on the face or on the hands up to including the elbow, is that one, you're not going to be able to make a complete ablution, and this is the reason why you're even going to make a tayammum. But two, you're also not going to be able to make a complete tayammum because you're not going to be able to wipe that entire area. So this becomes problematic. It becomes, it can become a difficulty if a person's in this type of situation. When someone with such a bandage on the members of dry ablution, the face or the arms, recovers and has his cast or dressing removed, he is obliged to make up all the prayers he performed with such an ablution. So this is the Shafi'i position. If you have a bandage on your arms or your face that you're unable to remove and you have to keep it on, then you're going to take this ruksa. You're still going to make ablution. You're still going to wipe over the bandage. You're still going to make tayammum in the stead of washing the area. However, all the prayers that you prayed during that time, you're not sinful for praying it in the manner that you're praying it in, but technically speaking, in the Shafi'i school, you'd have to make up all those prayers. All those prayers would need to be made up, because essentially what the Shafi'i school is saying is that you have not completed a complete wudu, nor have you completed a complete tayammum. So because you have not been able to complete either aspect of purification, then you have to make up all those prayers. As I mentioned, it's a little bit difficult in the Shafi'i school. The Hanafi school requires someone with an injury who wants to pray to make a complete ablution or bath, ghusl, if needed. But if this would entail harm, one of the things mentioned above, then when he comes to the injury in the ablution sequence, he is merely required to wipe it with wet hands so as to cover more than half of the injury. If this would also entail harm, or if he has a bandage that cannot be removed without harm, or he cannot reapply the dressing by himself and has no one to help him to do so, then he simply wipes more than half the bandage when he comes to it in his ablution. He may pray with such an ablution and needs not repeat the prayer later, provided his prayer fulfills the Hanafi school's conditions, integrals, and requisites, which for Shafi'is can best be assured by performing all the Shafi'i recommended measures and sunnahs for purification and prayer as though obligatory, and then checking if possible with the Najwal Hanafi to make sure one has done everything needed for legal validity. It is not necessary that he be free of minor or even major impurity at the time the dressing is applied. There is strong evidence for performing dry ablution in place of washing such an injury. To add it at the proper points of the ablution sequence as a precautionary measure will not interfere with the validity of following the Hanafi position just discussed. And so this is part of the translator, Sheikh Nu, Hafidullah. Him, including this, as I already mentioned, is that for many of us, it may be a easier situation that we may follow the Hanafi position, because in terms of the aspect of making the tayammum itself, and also the aspect of dealing with a dealing with a cast or bandage that will possibly be on the face or the arms up to including the elbows, it may be a difficult, especially if we're going to have that bandage on for a long period of time. So this is something that one can consider. My advice is, though, even though we are looking at it in the text here, one of the reasons why I did not necessarily go into detail, trying to explain it, is because it's much better to go to someone who is familiar with the Hanafi school of law, so that you can go over all the conditions, the integrals, and the details in regards to it. And this is why Sheikh Nu mentioned it in the text, that, if you're going to take a ruqsa, if you're going to take a dispensation from another madhab, another school of law, then you need to know the details of that particular school, so that you can ensure that your act of worship is valid in that school, and that you're not doing something that would be considered to be possibly invalid according to all the schools. And so if a person wanted to take the al-dhima, take the more precautionary position, they can definitely stick with the Shafi'i school. I know, for example, that one of my Shafi'i teachers, he took the al-dhima, he took the more precautionary position of the Shafi'i school when he became injured. And so what he did was that after his bandage was removed, he went back and he re-prayed all those prayers. This is the himma that he has personally. Not everyone may necessarily be at that level. So again, this is a dispensation that is, being mentioned, such that, a person can still, be fulfilling their obligation, even if they are not, in the position where they feel that they'll be able to make up, possibly 6 months, a year, or however long that they may have to have that bandage on, in terms of prayers. And so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easier for all of us, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us benefit in whatever was said, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us for any mistakes that may have occurred. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam wa subhanahu wa ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.